The hiring manager's eyes barely glanced up from his clipboard as she walked into the security firm's office, her crutches creating a rhythmic tap against the polished floor. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion," he said with that patronizing smile reserved for people he'd already dismissed. "This position requires physical capability and tactical experience. Maybe there's an administrative role that would be more suitable." What he didn't know was that those same crutches had once steadied the most feared marksman in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star recipient whose rifle had saved more lives than he could count on both hands. Sometimes the greatest warriors carry their battles in ways the world can't see, and sometimes those battles forge the kind of precision that can't be taught in any training manual. Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the crutches and pushed through the glass doors of Blackstone Security Solutions. Her reflection briefly caught in the polished surface, a woman in her early 30s with sharp brown eyes and the kind of posture that spoke of discipline even while relying on mobility aids. The receptionist looked up from her computer screen with that particular expression Sarah had grown to recognize, the one that mixed pity with poorly concealed discomfort. "I'm here for the 2 o'clock interview," Sarah said, her voice steady and professional. "Sarah Martinez." The receptionist's fingers hesitated over her keyboard. Let me just... Are you sure you have the right position? This is for our tactical security specialist role." Sarah had heard variations of this question 17 times in the past month. 17 different companies, 17 different ways of saying the same thing. "You don't belong here." She smiled, the kind of smile that had once reassured terrified soldiers in a forward operating base while mortars fell like a deadly rain around them. "I'm sure." The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and corporate ambition, its walls lined with certificates and photos of stern-faced men in tactical gear. Sarah positioned herself at the far end of the table, her back to the wall, old habits from Kandahar province that had kept her alive when the Taliban thought they had her patrol surrounded. She leaned her crutches against the chair with practiced efficiency, noting the exit routes, the window placement, and the way the fluorescent lights created shadows that could conceal movement. 3 men entered the room, their expensive suits a stark contrast to the tactical imagery surrounding them. The lead interviewer, a heavy-set man with graying temples, introduced himself as Director Harrison while his companions remained largely silent, their skeptical glances speaking volumes about their preconceptions. "Ms. Martinez," Harrison began, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man who'd already made his decision. "I have to be honest with you. When HR forwarded your application, we assumed there might have been some kind of administrative error. This position requires extensive physical capability, tactical awareness, and the ability to respond to high-stress situations with split-second decision-making." Sarah's fingers found the small bronze star pin on her blazer lapel, a habit she'd developed whenever civilians questioned her capabilities. The metal felt warm under her touch, carrying with it the weight of that October morning when she'd held her position for 6 hours straight, her rifle scope trained on a mountainside where insurgents had pinned down a medical evacuation team. Her legs had been whole then, strong and steady, but her hands had possessed the same unwavering precision that had earned her the nickname Ghost among her fellow Marines. "I understand the requirements," Sarah replied, her tone measured but carrying an undertone that made the director's assistant shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Perhaps you'd like to review my qualifications before we proceed?" Harrison glanced at the file before him with the practiced dismissal of someone going through motions. "Yes, well, I see you have some military experience. That's certainly admirable. But the reality is that our clients expect a certain image, a certain physical presence. Our security specialists need to be able to chase down threats, engage in physical confrontations, and maintain tactical superiority in dynamic environments." The third man, younger than the others with the lean build of someone who'd never missed a gym session, leaned forward with barely concealed impatience. "Ma'am, with all due respect, how exactly would you handle a situation where you needed to pursue an armed suspect through a multi-story building, or provide close protection detail for a high-value client in a hostile environment?" Sarah's mind flashed to the streets of Fallujah, where she'd provided overwatch for convoy operations from rooftops that required her to climb 3 stories with full gear and a 50-pound rifle system. She remembered the morning when her spotter had taken shrapnel from an IED and she'd carried him 2 miles through urban combat zones while maintaining radio contact with air support and coordinating medical evacuation. She remembered the weight of responsibility that came with knowing that 47 confirmed kills weren't just numbers in a file, but lives saved because her trigger finger never hesitated when American soldiers needed her protection. I handled those situations for 8 years in some of the most dangerous territories on Earth, she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from speaking life and death decisions into radio microphones while bullets snapped overhead. The difference is that my clients wore American flags on their shoulders, and the stakes were measured in blood, not quarterly profit margins. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Harrison cleared his throat, his discomfort evident as he shuffled through papers that Sarah suspected he wasn't really reading. The assistant checked his watch with the impatience of someone eager to end an awkward conversation. "Ms. Martinez, we certainly appreciate your service," Harrison began, his tone taking on the patronizing quality that Sarah had come to associate with civilians who used military gratitude as a polite way to dismiss military capability. "But the corporate security world is very different from military operations. We need someone who can adapt to civilian environments, someone who won't draw unwanted attention or create liability concerns for our firm." The bronze star seemed to pulse against her fingers as Sarah remembered the citation that accompanied it, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. The words had felt surreal when they were read aloud at the ceremony, but they carried the truth of a day when everything had gone wrong, and she'd been the only thing standing between a medical team and a carefully planned ambush that could have cost 12 American lives. Before Sarah could respond, the building's emergency alarm system pierced the air with its urgent electronic shriek. The sound was immediately followed by the automated voice that echoed through the building's intercom system. "Security breach detected. All personnel remain in place. Security breach detected." The 3 men looked at each other with the confusion of people whose emergency training consisted of annual fire drills and tornado warnings. Harrison fumbled for his phone while the assistant stood up uncertainly, moving toward the window as if he could spot the source of the threat from 15 floors up. Sarah's transformation was immediate and absolute. Her entire body language shifted from accommodating interview candidate to tactical operator in the space of a heartbeat. She assessed the room's defensive positions, noted the distance to the door, and calculated probable threat vectors based on the building's layout and the nature of the alarm. Her hands moved to her crutches, not as mobility aids but as potential weapons, their aluminum construction capable of delivering devastating impact if properly leveraged. "How many floors between here and street level?" she asked, her voice now carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. 15, Harrison replied automatically, then seemed surprised that he'd answered so quickly. "Emergency stairwells?" 2, east and west sides. Sarah was already moving, her crutches carrying her to the window with fluid efficiency. She peered down at the street below, her eyes automatically cataloging vehicle positions, potential sniper nests, and crowd movement patterns. White sedan, government plates, positioned to observe the main entrance. 2 occupants, driver maintaining engine idle. That's not law enforcement response, that's surveillance. The younger man stared at her with growing astonishment. "How can you possibly know that from up here?" "Because I spent 3 years identifying potential threats from observation posts that made this look like a front row seat," Sarah replied without taking her eyes from the street. "Your building security just went into lockdown mode, which means either they detected an actual breach or they're responding to a credible threat assessment. Either way, we need to assume hostile intent until proven otherwise." She turned from the window, her military bearing now impossible to ignore. "Director Harrison, I need you to contact building security and request a status update. Ask specifically about the nature of the threat and whether law enforcement has been notified. Use the landline, not your cell phone. If this is a coordinated attack, they might be monitoring cellular communications." Harrison reached for the phone with the automatic compliance of someone who'd recognized genuine authority when he heard it. As he dialed, Sarah continued her assessment, her eyes never stopping their systematic evaluation of the room's defensive capabilities. The conference table provides minimal cover but could be repositioned to block the doorway if necessary. The filing cabinets along the east wall would stop small arms fire but won't help against anything larger than a 9mm. If we need to evacuate, the west stairwell provides better concealment and multiple exit options at the ground level. The assistant, who'd been silent throughout the interview, found his voice. Are you seriously treating this like we're in a war zone? Sarah's eyes met his with the steady gaze of someone who'd learned the hard way that violence could erupt anywhere, anytime, and that survival depended on being prepared for possibilities that others couldn't imagine. Son, the difference between a war zone and a corporate office building is often just a matter of timing. The principles of tactical awareness don't stop being relevant just because you're wearing a business suit instead of body armor. Harrison hung up the phone, his face pale. Security says they detected unauthorized access through the parking garage. Multiple individuals, possibly armed. Police are en route, but they're advising all personnel to shelter in place until further notice. The room's atmosphere shifted as the reality of potential danger settled over them. Sarah noticed how the three men instinctively looked to her for guidance, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by the kind of deference that people show when they suddenly realize they're in the presence of someone whose expertise might be the difference between safety and catastrophe. All right, Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable tone of command. We're going to establish a defensive position and wait for law enforcement to clear the building. Director Harrison, I need you to turn off the lights and move away from the windows. If there are hostile elements in the building, we don't want to provide them with easy targets or silhouettes. As the men followed her instructions with surprising alacrity, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. 20 minutes ago, these same people had questioned her ability to handle security challenges. Now they were following her tactical guidance with the trust typically reserved for seasoned professionals whose competence had been proven under fire. The emergency alarm continued its urgent wail, but Sarah found the sound almost comforting. It reminded her of the klaxons that had saved her life countless times in Afghanistan, warning of incoming mortars or rocket attacks that required immediate response and absolute trust in training and instincts. She thought about the Bronze Star citation that had mentioned her exceptional courage under fire and tactical brilliance that directly resulted in the preservation of American lives. The medal had been presented in a ceremony that felt like a lifetime ago, when her legs were strong and her future seemed clearly mapped out in desert camouflage and military precision. But as she watched three corporate executives follow her tactical guidance with growing confidence and respect, Sarah realized that her service hadn't ended with her medical retirement. It had simply evolved, adapting to new environments and new challenges while maintaining the same core mission that had defined her military career, protecting others and ensuring that everyone under her watch made it home safely. The crutches that had been symbols of limitation just an hour ago now felt like extensions of her tactical capability, tools that enhanced rather than hindered her ability to serve and protect. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what you can do, but from what you've learned to overcome. And sometimes the most important battles are fought not with rifles and body armor, but with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you faced the worst that life can offer and emerged stronger for the experience. As the sound of approaching sirens began to filter through the windows, Sarah Martinez smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd just reminded the world that a warrior's value isn't measured in the mobility of their legs, but in the steadiness of their hands and the unshakable courage that lives in their heart.